My father likes to press my buttons. At least, I think he does. If you were to ask him, he would say that I'm the troublemaker and I like to press his buttons. You know what? In fact, he'd probably call me a brat. You see, I was raised in a very conservative evangelical house, which means that my shorts needed to be a certain length, my music needed to pass an appropriate test, and questioning authority, well, that was a definite no. But remember, I was the brat. So my cassette tape labeled Amy Grant, a wholesome Christian artist. If you put it in my Walkman, it had Bon Jovi. And the shorts that were too short, if you checked out my backpack, yeah, those were in there, ready to go to the mall with my friends. And questioning authority. Well, I specifically remember in 8th grade, the nuns taking me out in the hallway, saying, "Katie, stop asking so many questions." The dining room table, my father would announce that this is the way we are going to think about this social issue, and I would argue just the opposite to see what would happen. My mother would put her hands in the air and say, "All the two of you do is rant and rave." To which my father would say, "Well, one person's ranting and raving is another person's interesting conversation." Now, fast forward a couple of decades, and I'm the one who is fielding the dining room table questions, or the grocery line questions, or the Uber driver questions. Basically, anyone who finds out I'm an educator has the same question. What's with kids these days? I mean, we've been asking it for generations. In fact, the Uber driver went on to say, back in my day, I used to go outside, I'd play all day, I'd get in trouble, I'd get myself out of trouble. Kids today, they just have their faces buried in their phones. They don't know how to problem solve, they don't know how to think for themselves. He's got a point. So why don't we rant and rave about that for the next few minutes? As an educator for over 25 years, I have seen a lot of shifts in education. But around 2010, I saw a large one. My classroom that was once filled with students who were coming and going, energetic, full of questions, suddenly seemed to just be disengaged. They'd come and go without even giving their peers or myself a glance. I wanted to know what was going on, so I did what I do best, and I gathered my high school students together, and I simply asked. I asked, what's the purpose of school? Now, look, I'm not naive. I didn't expect them to tell me, oh, school is where we find the meaning of life, or school is where we have fun every day and we find our lifelong friends. I don't like going to school every day, and I'm the teacher. But I was a little surprised at what they said. Let me just tell you. They said, what does it matter what we think? I mean, we come to school, you give us the information, we memorize it, we regurgitate it onto a test, we pass the test, and we get the hell out of here. School has no purpose. I was disheartened. I wasn't just disheartened, I was alarmed. I mean, if students don't see the purpose in school, what are we doing? Let me tell you a story. I had a student, his name was Mark. He was a sophomore. And in his own words, he didn't care about anything. He was loud, he was defiant, and his main goal in his day was to get sent to the dean's office. Well, I wasn't about to let that happen. I wanted him to stay in my classroom, I wanted him to learn, but I could see that his behavior, it was wearing not only me, but the rest of the class down. So one day he was absent. And I said to the class, what can we do? How can we create a better environment that we are more of a community, we learn together, including Mark? After a few minutes of silence, a girl in the back raised her hand, and she said, what if we write Mark a letter? How brilliant. So we did, not out of shame or out of punishment, but to set some boundaries, to let him know that we cared and to let him know how we were feeling. So the next day, Mark came into class, and I took him out into the hallway, and I said, Mark, the class wrote you a letter, and I want to read it with you. As I read it, I could see his face getting red. His hands were starting to shake. Suddenly, I heard words of anger, frustration, hurt, spewing from his mouth, along with every swear word imaginable. I looked up, and I could see the deans running to my rescue, and I just held them off. Because in the storm, I saw something else. I saw tears. And as he fell to the floor, I fell down with him, and I put my arm around him, and I said, Mark, look, I want you to know that we see you, we hear you, and we care about you. We know as a class we can do better. We know that you can do better. And we know that together we can become a better learning community. Now, I would love to tell you that the next day everything was great and Mark was wonderful and the class was wonderful, but that's not reality. It took time. But over the semester, Mark became engaged. He started asking questions. He started learning. My class, his peers, started embracing him and learning with him. That day was hard. It was hard for me and it was hard for Mark. But let me tell you what Mark taught me. He taught me that when we invest in our students, when they start to feel like there is purpose in themselves, in their peers, and in their learning, they can thrive. You know, I have taught thousands of youth in my career, all of them with their own stories, their own struggles, and their own potential. And let's be honest, our youth are not thriving. During my time doing my dissertation and writing my book, I have interviewed hundreds of teachers across this nation, and I asked them this simple question: what's with kids today? And here's what they told me. There's this overwhelming sense of apathy. And as I dug into that idea, it's really this frustration of disconnection. Students are feeling disconnected from themselves, their peers. They don't see that their learning actually has meaning and relevancy. And I'll be honest with you, we are at a crisis point when it comes to human connection. I've spent 15 years looking into this and researching it and trying to find a solution. You see, here's the problem. If our youth don't care, and if we don't teach them to care, then how in the world can we possibly expect them to solve problems, to challenge injustice, and to create a better future? Here's what I found, that together we must courageously reimagine education by igniting fearless curiosity, by cultivating deeper thinking so that our youth are empowered, they're confident, and they are resilient. And they are ready to embrace the limitless possibilities that are out there in the world for them today. And that they can create connections that will make social impact. So how do we do that? Number one, we have to infuse fearless curiosity, because that really is the antidote to apathy. If we allow our students to ask the difficult questions, if we empower them to research and learn knowledge they're actually interested in, they will be engaged. They will find meaning and relevancy in what they're learning. And I use the word fearless because asking those tough questions, seeking those answers, takes courage, resilience, mental fortitude. I think of Jessie. Jessie was a sophomore in my class. She sat in the back, often with her head down, silent. In an attempt to connect with her, I went up to her and I said, what do you like to do, after school and your free time? She told me that she liked to create websites. Bingo. We had a project coming up, and they had to research, that typical research project you probably all have done. But I thought, why not have them do some research and have them create a website? So I asked Jessie if she would help me, because I gotta be honest, I know nothing about building websites. And with a little bit of convincing and coaxing, Jessie agreed. Let me tell you, it's amazing what youth can do when you simply ask them. All of a sudden, that silent girl in the back became a leader in the front. She showed such fearless curiosity because she was creating engaging lesson plans. She was taking her knowledge and sharing it with her classmates. Her classmates were then taking that, because it's contagious, curiosity is contagious. She was taking that, and her classmates were loving it. They were taking the knowledge that they had from their research projects, and they were building incredible websites to share with friends and family and the community. All because Jessie had fearless curiosity. But here's the problem. In a recent survey of 10th graders across this nation, only 29% say that they actually get to learn things they're interested in. Only 33% of our students say they get to develop their own ideas. We need to give those Jessies more opportunities. See, we can't be afraid to explore new ideas. We can't be afraid to ask the tough questions, because asking the questions leads to thinking. Fearless curiosity is the foundation of thinking, which brings me to my next point. Deeper thinking is a survival skill. The ability to think in deep ways can be taught and practiced. Creative and critical thinking, along with taking risks, accepting failure, looking at multiple perspectives, allows us to then view all of this information that's out there, determine what's the right information, and then analyze it, evaluate it, and know what's the best path forward. In fact, according to so many studies like LinkedIn, Adobe, so many others, they're actually saying that it's what the future wants. That deeper thinking is needed for our youth to be successful in the future. But yet here's a problem. According to a recent study, only 4% of assignments are actually asking students to think at a higher level. 4%. That's got to stop. When I ask my students why, what they think, what's going on, they tell me that they're afraid. They're afraid to share their thoughts because they're afraid of failure, and they are afraid of being judged. As adults, we've got a model that, look, failure is not a stopping point, it's a starting point. It's a starting point for growth. I remember a time when I thought I created the best lesson and unit. This was going to be the unit that my students were going to remember for the rest of their lives, until it wasn't. It flopped. And I knew that thanks to Tim. Tim was brave enough to come up to me after class and go, let me tell you something, Mrs. Trowbridge, this assignment, I don't get it. It doesn't have a meaning to it. And personally, I don't want to do it. I was floored. And then I went home and I looked at some of the other things and the feedback my students gave me. Yeah, I missed the mark. So the next day I went back to school and I pulled Tim out in the hallway, and I know he thought he was in so much trouble, but I thanked him. I thanked him for his bravery and for his feedback. And then I humbly asked him to help me fix this. How might I create a better assignment that had higher level thinking, that had more meaning, and was more relevant and engaging? Together, Tim and I were able to build a much better assignment that he excelled at and that his students, his peers, excelled at. Why? Because he was brave enough to give me the feedback. I was humble enough to ask, why do you think that? And tell me more. So we can't be afraid of that. We can't be afraid to say, so tell me more. Why do you think the way you think? And tell me more about that. Yet we are, because sometimes we're afraid that we're going to learn something and someone disagrees with us or thinks in a different way. But that is the point of connection, which brings me to my last point. Curiosity sparks connection. We need that fearless curiosity, because then that connection then sparks the change. And then the change sparks social impact. So we tend to surround ourselves with people who think the same way we do. And that's getting us nowhere. It stifles innovation. Yet if we start to get to know each other and we connect with each other, those things can change. We can learn about each other on so many different levels. Yet, only 39% of those 10th graders actually feel like they belong in school. And see, without connection, learning becomes hollow. So if you're not connecting, you're not learning. I want you to remember that learning is a team sport. So even if you are sitting reading a book all alone, you're still in a team sport because you're connecting with that author. Even if you are ranting and raving with that author, you are still connecting. See, we have to look at multiple perspectives, much like at the dining room table. When my father would say one thing, and I would listen to him, I'd listen to his perspective, and I had to gather my thoughts and prepare to be the brat that I know he knew I was, and secretly I know he's proud of. But I had to gather my thoughts, I had to put my thoughts together so that I could then create my plan of what I was going to say. Because learning is a team sport. And because of that connection, we could then talk about the deeper thinking and the fearless curiosity that comes along with it. So what does that mean? That might mean you need to be maybe a little vulnerable. Maybe you need to embrace the chaos because learning can be messy. Because wouldn't it be amazing? Wouldn't it be amazing if you could walk into a school and students were chasing ideas instead of chasing grades? What if you walked into a school and empathy and collaboration were just as important as equations and essays? What if a school building was full of students and staff that were all feeling valued, where all their voices were heard, and where the learning connected to the world? I mean, talk about social impact. You know what we need? We need a deeper thinking revolution. We talk about changing and reimagining education, but we're not doing it. It's time to start taking that action, because my hope is that when someone comes up to you and says, "What's with kids these days?" you can say, "You know what? Kids are fearlessly curious. They think in such deep ways. They challenge assumptions. They collaborate and connect and solve problems that matter most." We need a deeper thinking revolution. It's time. Are you in? Thank you.